Welcome back to another episode of Consciously Clueless. I'm your host, Carly, and I'll be your guide on this journey from consciousness to cluelessness and back around again. Today on the podcast, I talk to Monica Chen. Monica is the Executive Director of Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, an educational nonprofit that contributes to the eradication of factory farming through a range of educational programs. FFAC explains the devastating impacts of industrial animal agriculture in schools, environmental and social justice organizations, faith and values-based communities, and government entities. Monica has been a teacher, an instructor. She's just truly amazing, and I learned so much in this episode. Here we go. Well, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate getting to chat with you.
It's my pleasure. I'm very happy to be here.
So the podcast is called Consciously Clueless, which came out of this idea of me realizing, I'm on this kind of journey to becoming more conscious and to learning more, but then sometimes you just realize like you're also so clueless and you're just trying to figure it out and everything in between. So I like asking people the first question, just where are you if today on the spectrum from conscious to clueless? Where are you feeling? Where are you at? How are you doing?
That is such an interesting question, Carly. I generally try to be a pretty humble person because even with, being the executive director of Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, there's just so many impacts of factory farming related to public health, social justice, the environment, animal welfare. And I cannot pretend to be an expert on the nuances of all those different impacts. So I feel like I've done a lot of learning in my lifetime, and I've talked to a lot of really intelligent people who are making these connections, but there's always so much more to learn.
Totally. It sounds like you are hungry to learn, but also, like you said, very humble about the process and realizing I don't know it all.
I don't. And I also have, my very specific perspective that comes from the identities that I have and the place that I live, which is Oakland, California. So it's a Western perspective. It's a coastal perspective, all these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So you just said you're the Executive Director of Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me a little bit more about that? The organization, that is actually, I was surprised when your name was shared with me that was an organization not on my radar. So please tell us.
Sure. Well, FFAC was founded in 2010 by a student at UC Berkeley who had just graduated, actually.
Oh, wow.
Her name is Katie Cantrell, and she just noticed that there were a lot of people at the university, courses at the university that care about and talk about sustainability, for example, public health, but they weren't talking about food and the impacts of factory farming. So she started to give presentations at the housing units and the classes, and they were just so well received, so impactful, because again, she was making these connections to things that people already cared about.
Right.
There was just a lot of positive reception. So that's when she just started to grow this organization. It became its own nonprofit, and we now have 14 staff all around the country. And we give presentations at primarily high schools and colleges. We've reached 220,000 people so far. And we also give presentations to corporate groups. We try and do lunch and learns. We try and just make sure that there is a lot of awareness of the impacts of our food choices, because so many corporations, city governments, our nonprofits care about reducing their carbon emissions, and we want to make sure food is a part of their climate action plans.
That's amazing. So when you say you talk to high schools and colleges or do presentations for different businesses and such, is that something that you are invited into? Is there a desire to have you there and they're asking, or are you kind of saying hey, we want to chat, or maybe both?
Yeah, so we do send out a lot of emails, tens of thousands of emails to teachers around the country. So there is that ask. We've also been around for a while now, so word of mouth has been huge for us. And there are very specific types of classes that really like to bring us back over and over again. Health classes, environmental science classes, and they just speak to the professional development networks that the teachers are a part of. So that's just given us a lot of openings. And we're, especially pre-pandemic, at a lot of different events, social justice events, climate strike. teacher events, veg fests, and so on. So I think that we've been fairly successful at getting the word out.
That's amazing. I also didn't realize, I'm just now realizing embarrassingly how much I didn't know about this organization. But you said 14 staff around the country, so it's not just California.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So people all around the country are doing that for different areas. Is there a Midwest person or?
Yes.
There is? Oh, okay, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, I'm already learning so much. It's been like 5 minutes. I love the fact that it started with a college, a recent college grad that was just seeing this need. It's like literally the definition of grassroots organizing, right?
Yeah, she didn't know how to run a nonprofit. She didn't have funding at the very beginning, and there's been huge learning curves, but yeah, I'm very proud of where we are today.
So Factory Farming Awareness Coalition. So obviously in the name, there's some explanation there of the things you're talking about, but like what kind of presentations or things are you doing for the community? Like, are there different ones or you kind of have a standard 101?
Oh, we have so much information. We tailor every single presentation to our audiences. So if I'm speaking to students in East Oakland that really care about immigrant rights, like of course we have to talk about immigrant rights and who's actually working on the slaughterhouse floor, part of the cleanup crew, all of that. If I'm talking to a climate reality group, 350.org, and obviously there'd be a lot more sides around climate change and environmental justice. So we have this huge library of slides, touching on all these different topics, right? The pandemics, COVID-19, swine flu, all of that. That's been really popular because of, this past year that we've had.
Interesting.
And we have all the standards that we can meet on our website. So if you are in the Chicago area, you could see that these are the Illinois standards that we are meeting.
So when you say that that's increased because of COVID or the last year, you said, you've seen an increase in people wanting to talk about the connection between factory farming and pandemics and such?
Yeah, I think so. And we're just very motivated to talk about this because, people have talked about how this is ultimately potentially a dress rehearsal for something that could happen again. And we're looking at, zoonotic diseases, and eating animals absolutely contributes to that. And we're talking about how we are deforesting, which means that the wild animals now are now much closer to our livestock. We've got a lot of concerns around keeping animals so close together and feeding them antibiotics so that they become resistant to them. So we're really creating this sort of like perfect environment for another potential pandemic. And I hope that through our outreach, people can start making that connection now so that hopefully the risk of those pandemics can be lessened in the future.
That's really amazing that you are, I don't know the type phrase, like going there, I guess, because I think there's been a lot of conversation that I've seen, like in the vegan circles I follow or plant-based stuff about that connection, but I haven't seen anyone offering like presentations and resources on that in the same way. So that's amazing.
Yeah, if anyone is listening who has an audience of, it could be a church group, it could be a school, it could be any nonprofit, it could be your company's lunch, and like we will come in and we will help facilitate that conversation, and we will bring our slides and we'll talk to you about what you want to make sure is covered and what will be interesting to folks. And I think a really key part of our work is that we don't just like tell people all these terrible things to make them feel depressed. We really are all about inspiring and empowering our audiences, and we look at solutions at a broader systemic level with like the various Farm Systems Reform Act, the resolutions at the city level, like we passed Green Monday in a bunch of cities to really connect again food to climate action plans. And also on an individual level, what can we be doing? What are the barriers that make it difficult to eat more plant-based? We talk about culture, we talk about meat masculinity, whatever it is that the audience, wants to talk about. And we understand that there are a lot of challenges and we want to make sure that we address them. So again, people feel empowered. And for me, in all of my work, it's been incredibly impactful to, do something where I feel like I'm contributing to a broader movement where people feel like they're a part of something and can do something about it.
So I want to go back a few things here. You mentioned a few policy things. And that is something that I am just starting to kind of learn more about. That is something I haven't been as proactive in learning about, kind of like where are policies at in the US or nationally with this type of stuff. So you like rattled off a few things like Green Mondays and some sort of act. Can you talk a little bit more about those?
Yeah, the Farm Systems Reform Act is federal policy that was introduced by Senator Cory Booker and Elizabeth Warren. I hope that eventually the Green New Deal will incorporate more around food and its connections to climate change. And we have been working with, several of our staff and student advocates are involved in the Sunrise Movement. At a local level, we've been working on just legislation around eating more plant-based and connecting it to climate action plans. And we had an initiative called Green Monday, which was started in Hong Kong, and it's a good name in the sense that it really shows the environmental connection with the term Meatless Mondays, which you might be familiar with, which is passed in a lot of cities. It's fantastic, but my only concern with some of the framing around it is the meatless sounds like you're taking something away from people. And as much as possible, I want to add things in. We also work with an incredible organization called the Better Food Foundation and Farm Forward, and they work on default veg or greener by default, which is what they do with a lot of the companies. And they say instead of the default being an omnivorous meal and the vegan has to order something special, right? Just make everything vegan, and then you can choose to get the omnivorous meal, right? And so it's
interesting.
Just
what a switch in our frame of reference and how we see food in this country.
Yeah, and if you want to chat with them, I'm happy to make a connection, because it is really amazing when you think about the ways that defaults just sort of like a part of our lives, like when many of us who have phones, right, and an iPhone, like the same ringer will just ring, and there's an infinite number of ringers probably that you could have, but that's the one that we don't change it. So if we keep on making the default eating meat, then it's hard to change it. So if we just flip the script, I think it could be a lot more accessible to folks.
Yeah, I would love to be connected, because that is a really interesting framework. What I really love that you said is Meatless Monday, that being taking something away. And that is so true, because I've had a few people in my life who want to eat more plant-based and then, message me and they wonder why they're so hungry, because all they did was eat exactly the same, but take meat out. Right. And it's like, well, okay, you need to replace it. Let's talk about options or how to fill you up in other ways. So I really like that kind of reframing of the Meatless Mondays too.
Yeah, what can we add in? And if there are people listening who are starting to eat more plant-based or just trying to change things up, I think it's really a shame that a lot of us just eat the same 10 meals over and over again, especially when we are very fortunate to go into a grocery store, many of us in the United States, and just see like this world of plenty. And perhaps you'll have the opportunity to read cookbooks or rent them from your library and just see the wealth of world cuisine that is very plant-based.
Yes. Yes, the Western diet really loves meat.
Yeah, it's a shame. And also dairy products here in the United States. I've been very sad. Another policy thing, right, is we used to have the food pyramid in the United States that specifically said to eat meat and to eat dairy, and that's what I thought I needed in order to be healthy. At least my plate now says protein. It doesn't specifically say meat. And then there's still that circle for dairy and cow's milk, which is just a shame, because many people in the United States have trouble digesting cow's milk.
I'm one of them. I'm lactose intolerant. That was the domino beginning this whole vegan journey.
Yep.
And I'm not alone in that. I know that initial like, my body doesn't like this. I wonder why.
Quickly add on, if there was a more inclusive policy, right? If our schools, our hospitals, and our prisons weren't defaulting to the policy around my plate, what would that change?
A lot. A lot. So I have been throwing a lot of questions to you about the organization, but I want to hear about your journey and how you kind of got here. So maybe let's start with how you became vegan.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that I've always been a very empathetic person. I had a little guinea pig when I was growing up, and I just
Me
always
too.
appreciated, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just appreciated her. She was, an herbivore, and there were people in my life that wanted to eat her or made fun of, like, having a relationship with an animal that was small. And I was 8 years old, and I just remember thinking, why aren't people trying to eat this guinea pig? Like, how does culture and masculinity? I didn't have the words for it at the time, but now
Right.
as I got older, I was like, why is this person saying this to me, that they want to eat my guinea pig? I didn't know that it was possible to, eat something besides animal products, because that was available to me at the time. But I met my first vegetarian when I was in 7th grade, just met my first vegetarian friend. I was like, oh, okay, I be vegetarian too. And it was the same when I was a senior in high school. I met my very first vegan friend, and just having that connection showed me that it was possible. And when I went to college, I just found a community there of people who cared about similar things. And that really helped me stay plant-based, stay vegan.
Wow, that's really great. I love that you had, and that's so many people's stories, right? Is that you had somebody else there kind of as a model of what's possible. And that's why I think it's so fun to be able to talk about these things, because then this conversation might be the thing for someone else that they go, oh, okay, yeah. You just never know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's really why at Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, we have the student advocates program, because we understand that there are people who just haven't met
Yeah.
other vegans, or people who are just like starting to make some of these connections, or people who want to have community around it and
Yeah.
just get to know folks. So yeah.
So when you initially went vegan, was there conversation or awareness for you about the connection to the environment? Because that was not the first thing on my radar. And I felt like really, I think I've talked about this in like every episode, but I went through the angry vegan stage, right? Where all of a sudden I felt like I had woken up and everything before that had been a lie. So I had this phase of learning about the environment and all that stuff, and just being like, wow, I didn't know how friggin' bad this was. Did you know that environmental connection right off the bat?
I think that the environmental connection became stronger when I actually dropped out of high school and I went to community college. That's where I met my very first vegan friend.
Okay.
And yeah, I was involved. Shout out to Dean's of College's environmental studies program, I guess. But I had a professor who was just honest about what we need to do on an individual level if we want to support the environment, to help save the planet, quote unquote. So that was just my introduction to it. And I worked with our student group working to institute a sustainable environment along the 37th parallel. Super long name, but that is how I first started working on institutional dining campaigns to bring more plant-based food to campuses.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I am curious how, maybe I'm just asking for advice, but I feel like there are this interesting subsect of environmentalists that see, like, that kind of ignore the connection between animals and are still avid meat eaters or consume dairy. What do you think that disconnect is for someone who's like really passionate about the environment but still doesn't see that connection? Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, I think that when people ask this question, I feel like there's always like the standard answers around cognitive dissonance and people
Yeah.
animals but eating others and all that. A lot of people are just trying really hard to see if it's possible to eat animal products in a more environmentally sustainable way. And theoretically, it is possible, like only with that one impact, like animal welfare, other things, like there's still lots of concerns. But I
Right.
think that an argument can be made that it is possible. And then we hold on to that example of something that is possible and say, like, okay, then we don't need to call ourselves vegan.
Right.
Labels, I think, are only helpful to you. And there are certainly detriments, I think, to labels and being put inside of a box. I get that. In our student advocates program, I think one of our interns recently said that it's like gender and sexuality, like, only label yourself something if it's actually helpful to you. So I understand that. The benefit that I would say to calling myself vegan has been that I can, go to a restaurant and I can clearly say this label, and it's something that is understood. My friends and family will, shop according to that label. But I also know that it's a label that carries a lot of, unfortunately, negative connotations.
Yeah.
And, can talk about some of those negative connotations and the reasons why they exist. The vegan movement has, I think, in the past been really actively, and it's just been racist in certain cases, sexist, sexist, and that's excluded a lot of people and made veganism seem like it's not inclusive. So
rejecting that label can kind of be a way to reject the bullshit within the movement, really. Right?
Just the stereotypes. Yeah. I used to date somebody who was eating vegan, but just didn't want to call themselves vegan, because by not doing it, they were able to just have more conversations where there wasn't like a guard up by the other person. It didn't feel confrontational. They didn't feel like they were being judged. I can sit here sometimes and say I am not judgmental, but people will not believe me, even though my conversation, my demeanor, the way I stand will not is not saying that I'm confrontational, but just the name vegan, I think, can be hard for folks.
Yeah, there's something about that word and what has been kind of like happening culturally that definitely still puts people on edge.
Yeah.
Another thing you mentioned was, kind of having that exploratory time in college. Did you go to college in California as well?
Yeah, for undergrad, I went to UC Berkeley.
Okay, so I was just thinking of the options that you had in California to kind of explore veganism. Did you have access to things that you felt like it was an easy transition?
Yeah, I think so. UC Berkeley actually has a vegetarian and vegan co-op it was student housing. So there were just of us living all together, and all the meals were by default vegetarian.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So that was really a great introduction. I think I've been very fortunate now to, a lot of restaurants. I've downloaded this app called A Billion. Have you heard of it?
No, I have the app Happy Cow, but what is it, A Billion?
Yeah, A Billion lets you review meals at restaurants, and it can be at non-vegan restaurants as well. What's really cool about A Billion, though, the company, is that they don't put any money like towards Facebook ads. They pay $1 for every single review that you do. And they do that because, and it's to be donated to a nonprofit. And they do that because they want the people who are actually using it to really help spread the word about it. And if you are at a Japanese restaurant and it's hard to get the vegan option, they will send that review back to the Japanese restaurant, say, hey, there are vegans eating here. It would be great if like you really highlighted like the avocado rolls, or this particular dish was really well received and you should have more of it. So it's a way of like showing that there's a lot of demand for vegan food. And it can also be for non-restaurant products. Like you could anytime you are at a grocery store and you try Miyoko's cheese or something like that, that is something that's reviewed, and so you can share that with it. It's a really cool network. I think that the app is really well done. It feels like Instagram. It feels like any other social media platform where you can interact with folks.
Well, I'm definitely going to download that after we get off of this call. I love learning these new things. That's the journey, right? Conscious to clueless and back around again. But I love that, this is going to be like episode 89 or something on this podcast. And you just, in the last 30 minutes, have taught me so many things about veganism. Like, that's the exciting part about talking to people. I joke that like, yeah, I love doing this, but really I'm just doing it because I love learning from people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
So how has your experience been, if you want to speak on this, being a woman of color in the vegan movement, kind of circling back to the stereotypes and the things we identified earlier, and how has that experience been for you?
I think that when I first graduated from college, I didn't know that there was a place for me really in the animal rights movement, but within the last few years, I think that the movement is striving to be more inclusive, and I became executive director in 2019, and I think that I've been very fortunate to work at FFAC in particular because there has been such a emphasis on those, again, like these interrelated oppressions. So I feel very fortunate now. I'd say that one thing that has made me feel most excited is the availability of more plant-based products. And in particular, I want to highlight our work with Green Monday in Hong Kong. They have Omni Pork, and it's basically a substitute for pig pork, and it is plant-based. And I think that it's actually a very useful product to have because I haven't seen it in the United States, and Chinese people, I am Chinese, use pig in like as a base for soups. They'll use it in dumplings. It's just used all over the place.
Yeah.
Because, and here in the United States, we've had vegan burger for a while now, but a burger is always like is often like shaped like a burger, and it can only ever be a burger. Whereas what I'm describing with pork, it's used just in so many different dishes. So having a base product like Omni Pork does enable more people, and because I'm Chinese, I'm thinking of Chinese people, but there are other people who will be able to use this product and can eat, you know, traditional foods.
Yeah, that I had a great conversation with somebody else on the podcast a few months ago about the idea of the importance, I guess, not the idea, the importance when you're working with communities of color and talking about veganism or being plant-based is not shoving all this different food as an example of what being plant-based can be, but actually just talking about the meals people are already making. I think you can, you know, that is important with anyone to show like, you don't have to change everything. Cook what you already love and like change it a little bit. So when you are not working or as the executive director, have that cap on your head, what other stuff do you enjoy? How do you take care of yourself? This is kind of it can be a heavy movement to be in, right?
Yeah, I honestly think that just existing in this world is kind of heavy.
Good point.
I've actually been reflecting on this a lot because many people have asked me about my self-care, and they're particularly concerned because I work in the animal rights movement, and especially in this particular space and for our organization. But I think that mental health can be a struggle, or has been a struggle for many years of my life as just somebody who is aware. When I've worked, you know, on the Navajo reservation where I saw like the effects of colonization and experienced rural poverty, and just tried to be a teacher in a system that seemed to not fully support the students and Dene culture. I've, you know, worked as a suicide prevention counselor and worked with the as a crisis support counselor here in Alameda County. And and, you know, just being somebody who is aware and awake in Oakland and walking around Lake Merritt, where we have a very large population of people who do not have housing. I'm just constantly aware that there is a lot of inequality in this world. I think that what has enabled me to keep on doing this work is I don't believe in bubble baths and chocolate as traditional ways of doing self-care, although if you do that, that's wonderful. But I try and shift the narrative around the things that take up money or things that take up additional time and like these separate activities. I want to integrate quote unquote self-care into my life. So it's very purposeful that I live where I live so I can be near my family and have that support. It's very purposeful that I live in a place where I can go around for walks because I need to do that in order to stay, I guess, sane, for lack of a better word. So yeah, and I also, Carly, since you had a guinea pig growing up, I still have a guinea pig to this day.
Oh my gosh, do you really? What's its name?
Her name is MC because she talks a lot.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. I really like that. I also have been trying to work to reframe that idea of self-care as this like separate thing on your to-do list, and how do you integrate it more just into your everyday life? Like, what does that look like, taking care of yourself all day long, not just when you get home from work?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a tricky thing when you're trying to kind of go against the capitalist work world that we are all very, very intertwined in.
Yeah, it's very challenging work. I mean, I'm really glad that you spoke to Arianish. I think that as she's a fellow executive director, and we have to think about, sustaining our organizations while also holding our ideals. And, we think about the nonprofit industrial complex, and it's difficult for us, I think, to reconcile all those things. And sometimes it feels like we're making compromises, but still trying to hold true to our values. And it's a lot for us to be thinking about. It requires from me a lot of brain power.
Yeah. It's I'm glad you said the thing about nonprofits too, because I actually think that this is a conversation that started with Ayanash, I believe. But we started talking about the idea of nonprofits, and I had been in a training for work. I work for a nonprofit. My full-time job is a nonprofit within the education sphere. And I've worked for nonprofits pretty much my whole working career after college. And I'd always thought of nonprofits as this different thing, and, big business as the evil. But going to this workshop about decolonizing nonprofits really blew my mind about the similarities and the funding and it's just everything. It was really interesting and made me think about things in a way that I had never done in terms of nonprofits.
Yeah. Was it put on by Nonprofit AF?
No, it was put on by the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits.
Interesting.
Is there anything that you want to share, or you want people to know, or anything that I haven't given you space to talk about?
I think that it's really cool to know that you are in Minnesota, because we will be expanding in the Midwest in particular. And our current Chicago director is moving into being the director of the student advocates program, but she is somebody who definitely grew up on a farm and can relate to a lot of folks in the Midwest who are used to seeing the cornfields and having it's just having that be a part of the reality, having your income, your family's income based in this whole system that we've talked about being very problematic. But I'm very interested in growing our presence in the Midwest so that we can do more educational outreach and connect with people. And I think that people who care about their families and their livelihoods can still care about issues in our food system. So if there are folks that are interested in getting to know us, whether it's presenting or maybe they are students and want to get involved in some of our advocacy programs and our training programs, they are welcome to reach out to us. Our website is ffacoalition.org. And we also have a lot of community events on our website as well.
That's amazing. You sparked another question in my mind, which always happens. When you said the Midwest thing, I've had a few people, push back or ask questions about, well, if you want, factory farming of animals to go away, what about all these farms, all these people who depend on that? And I know that there's more and more programs and resources popping up for people to actually just switch their farms and what they grow and what they harvest. Is that something you have resources on as well, or presentations or anything?
I get asked this question a lot, and I really do care about farmers. I don't see them as like a nemesis or anything like that, even though I think it's sometimes painted that way.
Right.
In fact, when there's so many documentaries that have come out that really show that a lot of the farmers are just as upset with the current state of farming and how they're essentially like just these huge monopolies that, whether it's the JBS, the Tysons, and so on, that have really controlled this and made it difficult for farmers to thrive. I think that MFA has a really interesting transformation program. They just put out a video about a farmer shifting to growing mushrooms. There's always the example of Elmhurst Dairy, which was in New York. Well, it's still in New York, but they are now just doing plant-based milks instead of cow's milk. And
wow, I would love to talk to them.
Yeah, and I recently had a really great call with somebody from Miyoko's, who you might know of Miyoko's cheeses, and they're looking for a dairy farm here in California. If they're interested in growing plants instead of having cows, they'll actually pay for that transition to happen.
That's amazing. I had Miyoko's cream cheese on my bagel this morning.
Great.
They're so good.
It is really delicious. I feel very fortunate to live very close to Miyoko, Rancho Compasión, and just have this abundance of her products out there.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I'm really excited to hopefully keep connecting with you in the future. You are just a wealth of knowledge, and you're just doing really lovely work. So I thank you for that.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Carly. Thank you for caring about this and helping to spread the word.
Oh, absolutely. Where can people get a hold of you? I know you just said the website. Did you want to share like your email or maybe an Instagram handle or anything?
At FFAcoalition.org is everything for us. So you can find us on Instagram and on Twitter, on Facebook, and feel free to look me up on LinkedIn as well. But our website is really the best way to get in touch.
Perfect. I will put all of that in the show notes. And yeah, if you think of any Midwest connections that you need me for, please keep me in mind.
Yeah, we're going to be hiring very soon, so I'll send you the job description.
Fun. I want to look at it, or at least I'll know maybe some people in the area that I can pass it on to.
Perfect. Thank you, Carly.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining me. I really had a pleasure talking to you.
My pleasure. Bye, Carly.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Consciously Clueless. If you enjoyed that episode, hit subscribe wherever you're listening. If you want to help me get this into the ears of more listeners, send it to a friend, text it to a family member, share on social media, and tag me. Whatever you can do really helps me out. If you're curious about what else I offer, head over to patreon.com/consciouslycarly for yoga, for health tips, for behind the scenes podcast stuff coming out soon. There's so much stuff over there. It's really fun and I'd love to see you there. Until next time.